Hello everyone and welcome to Surrogacy Australia's webinar. I'm your host Anna Mackay and my co-host Melissa and her husband Harry lived in Adelaide when they became parents to their son Harvey in August 2024 last year. Harvey was carried by surrogate Rachel, who was previously a stranger, and she lives in Goolwa, which is in regional South Australia. Melissa has MRKH, which is about being born without a uterus, and it was a long journey to motherhood, initially being part of uterus transplant trials, a move from Sydney, and then a couple of years in the surrogacy community before Rachel found them. So this lady is a very determined mother. Welcome, Melissa. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are joined by Melissa tonight, and we've got an extra special guest of her son Harvey with us. Thank you for joining us, Melissa.
Please, thank you for having us.
So as I said in the introduction, you have MRKH, which means you were born without a uterus. So you found that out at some point in your life. Do you want to take us back to the beginning about how you eventually ended up on the path of surrogacy?
Yep, so I was officially diagnosed with MIKH when I was 19. So it was actually quite a few years before I was actually diagnosed. A lot of doctors kept misdiagnosing me, and yeah, it was quite actually a traumatic diagnosis journey. So then I had a laparoscopy, I think when I was 19, to officially confirm, what I was missing. Found out I still had obviously ovaries and fallopian tubes, and yeah, so it's been quite a long journey. And when I was first diagnosed, it was quite a shock, of course.
I'd imagine that there's a grieving process that goes on.
Definitely, yes, definitely. So it took me quite a few years actually to sort of heal from that. I think because of my diagnosis journey, it didn't help either, of course. But yeah, I basically lived 11 years without knowing whether I'd be a mother. So that was quite hard. So even every day, some days were harder than others. But I think the important part was that I tried my best to sort of, not let that dictate my life and sort of move past that.
It sounds like you're really condensing into a few sentences there an enormous journey that has gone on.
Definitely, yeah.
Was there much support out there from peers or other people that you knew of, or any counselling that helped?
Well, at the time when I was first diagnosed, my fertility doctor didn't even know what it was, and she told me to Google what I thought I had, which was quite distressing. So that's what I did. I Googled, born without a uterus, and then it came up with MIKH. And I was lucky enough to come across a MIKH foundation that was actually just being established in Australia. So I reached out to the founder, and she put me in touch with a doctor from the Royal Hospital for Women in Randwick, and that's how I basically got officially diagnosed. So yeah, and I did also go through some counselling, because obviously, you're pretty young at the time, teenager, just finished high school. It was quite a shock, but not only for me, but also for my mum. My mum was very devastated by my diagnosis. She thought in some way that it was her fault. If anything, she was probably more heartbroken than I was at that point in time. So that was quite difficult for her. It almost was like a grieving process for her as well. So yeah, it was hard with both of us. And I think it was really good having my mum's support as well. We both supported each other and sort of dealt with, the highs and lows.
And I guess, yes, as a mother, feeling like you want to help your children no matter what, and there's that's really tricky. But seeing you as a mum now must be beautiful for her. And
definitely, yeah.
But to the point where, as a parent, you want to help your children no matter what. Well, that is what your mum ultimately did offer, wasn't it?
Right, yes. So back in 2019, we heard about the uterus transplant trial at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney. And when Mum heard about it, she was really excited and thought, I'll do it for you. Let's call them right away. And the cutoff age at that point in time was 65. And I think my mum was 63 at the time, or 64. So she's like, we need to get this done ASAP. So we went through the whole screening process. We completed all the blood tests, the ultrasounds, the MRIs, the counselling, the whole thing. We were just waiting for it to be for everything to be sent through to the ethics committee. And then my husband and I, we were going to start our IVF in April of 2020. But then, of course, COVID happened. So it all came to a halt. We were actually meant to have, I was actually meant to have, and my mum obviously was meant to have the procedure done after our wedding in September 2020. But obviously it just completely came to a halt when COVID happened, that we had to actually withdraw from the program. So that was quite upsetting, because had gone so far, and then suddenly just, okay, it's not happening anymore. We sort of lost that hope, and but I think in a sense I was relieved personally, because I was worried about my mum, especially because of her age, but also because it's such a big procedure. It's just, yeah, I know I have a friend that actually had a uterus transplant. She now has a little girl, but she has gone through so much. And her health has been greatly affected as well because of all the immunosuppressant drugs that she's been on, or that she's still on. So I think I sort of look at it as a silver lining in a sense. That didn't work out, and I also look at it as in a way that we met Rachel, our surrogate, and we just feel so incredibly lucky and grateful to have her in our lives. So she's like become a lifelong friend now. So yeah.
So yeah, you get an extra bonus family as well.
That's right.
And so we met in person when you moved to South Australia for husband Harry's work, I think it was. Roughly, do you remember when you moved to South Australia?
That was actually during COVID. So that would have been, I think, May 2020, perhaps it was. Yeah, so my husband's family actually live in Adelaide, so that was another reason why we relocated back to Adelaide. And we just wanted a different lifestyle. But obviously at the time it was a bit crazy. The borders were shut, and yeah, so that was a bit full on at the time. Yeah, a long drive and a long trip over to South Australia with all the chaos happening at the time with COVID. So
So in some ways it was, if we look at that, say August-ish 2020, when you're in Adelaide, to August 2024, you know, it was 4 years for you to be sort of embracing surrogacy, to become a mum.
right.
And I think in your own journey, then it was probably, well, we haven't checked the timeline there, but was it close to 2 years with your own surrogate that once you met till birth, or was it 1.5 years? Do you remember?
I think we actually connected with our surrogate at the end of 2022, I believe. And then we met up at the beginning of the year 2023. Yeah. So it was a bit of a process, obviously, because it was just unexpected when our surrogate reached out to us. So we had to sort of jump straight on to another round of IVF. Yeah. And
so, because we had met, you know, in the Adelaide community a couple of times in that sort of 2-year period, and that's hard for intended parents, isn't it? That waiting game, not knowing will you ever find a surrogate. Any comments or thoughts about that stage of the journey?
Yeah, I think it was very difficult for my husband and I at times. So we were part of the surrogacy community in South Australia for quite a while, and we felt like everyone else was finding their surrogate and connecting, and we were sort of trying to sort of put ourselves out there, get the message across, attend lots of events, but we just felt like we weren't really getting anywhere. And I think it got to a point where we just feel like, okay, let's just go with flow. If it happens, it happens. We looked into foster care, and that we were actually rejected for that because we had previously undergone IVF. So that was the reason why we couldn't pursue that any further. And I think, 3 weeks after that, after our rejection for foster care, is when Rachel actually reached out to us. But I think it's definitely hard, you know, thinking you may never connect with anyone, you may never have a surrogate. And when Rachel actually offered to us, we offered to help us out, we actually couldn't believe it. We just thought, you know, maybe she's just saying that, or, you know, it's hard to sort of believe that someone can do such a big thing for you. Yes. So at the time, my husband and I were just sort of, oh, you know, we'll just see what happens. You know, she might change her mind though, or, you know, it might not work out. And obviously it did work out, but I think because we were so used to disappointment and so used to things not going to plan, that we were sort of expecting that in a sense. So
2 questions about that stage before we move on to your photos. And how did Rachel connect with you? Was it through one of the Facebook groups and a post there?
Yeah, so we actually met Rachel through the Australian Surrogacy Community page on Facebook. Very unexpected, very random. What happened was I essentially I saw Rachel's introduction and I just liked her post. And then a couple of hours later, I received a message from her and I thought, oh, okay. We started chatting over Messenger for a bit and then we met up, I think, the week after.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was literally liking her post. You hadn't commented.
Yeah. No, I didn't even comment. I think at that point we just felt like, oh, you know, we've sort of given up and, you know, we'll just see what happens. But I think as we were trying so hard for so long, it just felt like we lost that hope in a sense.
Definitely.
And I thought, okay, I liked what Rachel was saying, and I just thought, oh, everyone's commenting. There's heaps of people, you know. But yeah, very, very unexpected, very random. A complete shock, to be honest. Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
The best shock ever. You've got a little
That's right,
on your
definitely.
lap from it. Any advice or guidance then to people who might currently be in that situation, in that long waiting game?
Yeah, I think I would probably try to plan as best as possible, even though you may not believe it could happen to you. I think I would ensure you have undergone IVF or you have enough frozen embryos before even looking at connecting with a surrogate. I think that's one thing that was quite tough for us, was that we had done an IVF cycle before and only had one frozen embryo. But I think, you know, at that point we just felt like, oh, we're not going to connect with a surrogate anyway. So we didn't pursue another IVF round. But I think it's, yeah, definitely important to have that less sort of have that all ready to go. There's a lot less stress as well.
Yeah, that's good advice there. Yeah, having some embryos in the freezer as much as you can, even though it's hard to know, oh, will I find a surrogate or not? Is it worth it? But if you've got them there, that can save time later on too.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, we're going to go share the photos now that you've shared with us, and we'll use that to talk through your journey a bit more. So hang on, I've got to load it. I think that went to the photo of you and egg collection, yes?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
So yeah, tell us what's happening here. Was this second egg collection you were talking about?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, the second round of IVF is when we met Rachel. So I think roughly 3 months after meeting Rachel is when we did the second round of IVF. Obviously, there was a bit of preparation involved with that. And as you can see in my hand, I had 8 eggs collected. So that was quite exciting for us and quite amazing because our first round we only had 2 eggs collected. So I think there's a lot of stress for both my husband and I when we did the second round because we just felt like, oh my gosh, it's, you know, what happens if we don't get enough eggs, we don't get enough embryos. So that's another reason why I said it's important to have the embryos ready to go. So that definitely caused a lot of stress at the time.
Yes. And so how many embryos did you end up with in the freezer?
We ended up with 4 from the second round.
Right, and 1 from the first, so you had 5.
Yeah, 5 all up, that's correct, yeah.
And then it was, but it was the third transfer you were
The third transfer, yeah, that's right.
And so is this the photo of your team at that third transfer or one of the 3?
So this would be the photo taken at the first transfer. And the first transfer resulted in a biochemical pregnancy. So that was quite upsetting. Yes,
because you sort of get your hopes up a little bit, but then it's
yeah, that's right, definitely. I think we had sort of holding on to the hope a bit, you know, maybe it's going to be okay, you know, and obviously it wasn't. So there's a lot of grief around that when it didn't work.
And then I imagine as a team, well, I mean, we ultimately were 3 transfers. Our second embryo didn't survive being thawed out. And any reflections on that time when you've had the second embryo transfer hasn't worked? Is there ever those thoughts of, is it ever going to happen? Will the surrogate decide she doesn't want to continue?
Definitely, we definitely had those thoughts when the second one didn't work. We're just like, oh, you know, like it was, I think that was what sort of made us think a lot more when the second one didn't work. We just feel like, okay, is this ever going to happen? What if Rachel decides that she doesn't want to go through this again? Because obviously the medication that Rachel had to take was quite intense, and she was having quite unpleasant side effects as well. So we felt really bad for her having to deal with those side effects and knowing what the effect it's having on her body and her mental health perhaps as well. And we even said to Rachel, you know, if you don't want to continue, we completely understand, you know. So yeah.
Well, that's lovely of you as IPs to say that. I mean, fair enough, I guess, but that's really hard when it's your dream, but you're realizing somebody else is putting their body and their family on the line to help you, having an impact. So, but then it worked, hey?
That's right. And here he is.
Yes, and here he is on your lap. And so the date on that embryo transfer, I'm guessing, was 13th of December 2023. So did you therefore know by Christmas time, roughly, that you were pregnant?
We did actually. So we found out, I think, 2 days before Christmas. So it was literally a Christmas miracle.
Yes.
And at the time, Harry and I, my husband and I, we were actually out when we got the phone call. And when the nurse called, we said, "Oh, are you sure though? Are you sure?" So even then we still couldn't believe it. It was just complete shock.
Of course. And so then the pregnancy rolls on. So we've got a few photos that happen here during the pregnancy of some of the scans and a baby shower. Anything that you think of when you look back at these photos?
Yeah, I honestly just I can't believe it. Even just looking at those photos, it's just crazy to believe that we were once just looking at the ultrasound and now here he is.
He is wiggling
just,
on. Yeah. And how was the pregnancy for Rachel? Was it similar to her own or a tricky one?
I think she had a relatively smooth pregnancy, except the only thing is she actually became quite unwell. I think around 30 weeks, she developed pneumonia. So that was quite scary. And of course, you know, we're worried about not only Rachel, but of course, little Harvey. So, you know, my husband and I, we just tried to sort of not let those thoughts sort of get to us and, you know, just try to stay positive. And but I think that was quite hard, just not having any sense of control as well.
And for those that don't know, Goolwa to Adelaide, it's sort of about an hour and a half type of drive.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
And so how often were you able to see each other, or were there any types of supports you were able to offer her during pregnancy?
Yeah, so we regularly communicated. So my husband's family actually live in Victor Harbor, so quite close by to Rachel. So we'd always try to pop by and see her, come go over for you know, sort of go to a cafe for lunch. So we did our best to sort of, you know, keep the communication going. And every time we saw Rachel, it was just incredible seeing her with a little bump and seeing her grow. And it was even seeing her then was just so hard to believe. It was all happening. Yeah, so
Lovely. Okay, so we're just working through these photos, but then we get to the day of birth. But before we say that, is there anything else from the pregnancy that sticks out in your mind that's worth mentioning to listeners?
not that I can really think of at this point
good.
in time, no.
So the day of birth, hey, was that a planned thing, the date with an induction, or it was just wait and see when she goes into labour?
Yeah, so a planned induction. Yeah, so that was a bit of a crazy time as well because my husband and I were in the process of actually moving house. So a bit chaotic, but yeah, so induction was planned at 38 weeks. So actually the date originally was meant to be, I think, roughly the 19th or 20th of August, but they ended up bringing it forward to the 16th of August. So that sort of caught us off guard. But pretty crazy because Rachel's daughter, her birthday is actually the same day. So yeah, it's pretty full on.
And so, yeah, you got to become a mum. And so a lot of IPs at the beginning, you know, who are just learning about surrogacy sometimes wonder, oh, were you at the birth? And so, yes, talk us through the day of birth, witnessing, you know, another woman in labour and birthing.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty crazy, to be honest. So we received a phone call, I think around 4:30 from Rachel's partner, and we could, you know, hear everything in the background. So that was a bit full on. my husband and I didn't sleep at all that night, no sleep whatsoever. When we arrived, we're actually pretty lucky we arrived when we did, because I think roughly an hour or so later is when Harvey was born. I think it's sort of quite confronting seeing, you know, Rachel in so much pain, and you feel completely useless. You feel, you know, really bad, you know, because you feel like you can't do anything, and you're trying your best to sort of be there to support her, and you're sort of in the way at the same time. So that was a bit hard, seeing Rachel in such intense pain, and, you know, not being able to do anything about it. But we're very grateful that Rachel's partner was there during the birth as well. So it was like, yeah, we're really grateful for that, to be honest, because my husband and I just felt like, you know, what do we do? Where do we stand? Like, you know.
Yes, not having been at births before. So
That's right, yeah.
and then he entered the world, and so photos here of you giving Rachel a big hug, and then you guys holding Harvey for the first time. So when you look back at these photos, yeah, what are you thinking and feeling?
Oh, to be honest, it's such a surreal feeling. The moment I held Harvey, I just felt like I was in a dream. I felt like I was just not in my body. It was so hard to believe that it's finally happened after all these years, after such a long journey. Even now, sometimes I still pinch myself. I can't believe it. But yeah, it was very, very emotional day. Running on lots of adrenaline, and, you know, it's just, yeah, there's a lot of emotions going on, lots of things.
Definitely. And Rachel has a big smile on her face there. She looks pretty proud of what she's
Yeah.
Yeah. And then life starts to go on a little bit, doesn't it? And so we've got, well, the photos still in the hospital of Rachel having some cuddles. Did you stay in the hospital with Rachel in like rooms next door to each other?
Yes, we did actually. So we ended up having to stay overnight. And yeah, we had rooms right next to each other, which was really nice actually. So that was a bit unexpected, because I didn't think that my husband and I would be able to stay the night. We weren't really sure. But yeah, it was really nice.
And that must be nice as you start to bond with Harvey, your son, and then also being able to see Rachel and her to have cuddles
Yeah,
and things
that's
like that.
right.
Yep. And then, so yes, there's more photos in the hospital of you two with sleep deprived and having a little nap while Harvey has a nap too.
That's it, yeah. Very big day.
Did Rachel take that photo?
Yeah, I think she did, yeah, from the bed, yeah.
And I reckon as a surrogate, watching your IPs who are now parents, you know, doting on their child or even just being near them, that must have been a really precious moment for her too.
Yeah, I definitely think so, yeah.
And then you had some newborn photos taken. Some beautiful photos here of really celebrating being a mum and dad.
Yeah, definitely very precious memories that we will hold on forever.
Yes. And some, yeah, beautiful photos of Harvey here too. And then got a couple of photos here of Rachel holding Harvey at catch-ups that you've had in the future. And I sometimes, you know, imagine being an IP right back at the beginning and seeing another woman, the woman that birthed your child, holding your child. And there might be for some people some fears at the beginning, or I'm not sure if jealousy is the right word, but uncomfortableness. Do you remember feeling that at the beginning of a surrogacy journey, and then looking at this photo now? What do you feel?
No, I don't think I really had any of those feelings, to be honest. I think for me, it's sort of hard, you know, entrusting someone to, you know, basically grow your baby for you, especially when you know, they're a stranger initially. But I think it's all about trust. And we trusted, we felt very connected with Rachel from the very beginning, just instant connection. Yeah, I think for me, it's, you know, a bit hard, you know, not obviously experiencing all the pregnancy symptoms and, you know, obviously giving birth. That's sort of quite hard at times. But now it doesn't even, I don't even think about that anymore, because obviously, you know, Harvey's here and that's all that matters to me.
Beautiful. And so, yes, and then some catch-ups. So when you sent these to me, I recognised the cafe. Anybody from Adelaide? That's Mother Duck Cafe down at Goolwa.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, and it almost, we sometimes as surrogates like to think that they remember us. It's almost as though Harvey's like looking up at her, really interested. Who knows? Maybe he.
Yeah.
And so now, though, you've moved back to New South Wales, and so you won't be able to see each other as much in person. Have you got any plans for an in-person catch-up coming up?
Yeah, I think we're hoping to perhaps organise another trip to Adelaide, maybe in the middle of the year sometime. I think, you know, we'll always be seeing my husband's family anyway, so you know, we'll always try to make an effort to see Rachel and catch up. It was actually really nice when we caught up with Rachel last month. It was just really nice because obviously she could see Harvey, how much he's changed, how much he's grown, how big he is, and yeah, we always want to maintain that relationship with Rachel. So definitely try to keep up with regular catch-ups for sure.
And I guess there are other ways of staying in contact too, with FaceTime, Messenger
Yeah.
photos, and I'm sure you do that. And then, yes, some photos of you guys as a family of 3. You're a mum, hey? You're a mum.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing those photos now, and I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping, and I'll say to people listening that you're welcome to leave the webinar whenever you need. You don't have to stay to the end, but we're going to keep chatting for a little bit longer. We have had lots of questions come through tonight. We don't usually have this many, which is wonderful.
Oh, there you go.
And so there are a variety of questions that we've had typed in. I'm just going to do a couple first that are about SAS to get them sort of out of the way. Anonymous asks sort of 2 questions. I might do them sort of in one, well, at the same time. So for those who don't use social media, does SAS help with introductions, matching, etc.? How many surrogates are there to IPs? I imagine there's a long list of IPs. Yes, so SAS does help with introductions, and you know, in some ways, ideally, it is for people who don't use social media much, and some people, you know, for their own professions or whatever, are not on social media much. On our website, you can find our monthly report to see the number of IPs and surrogates who are engaged with SAS at any point in time. But that then leads me on to the second question, which is, does SAS actually have any surrogates in waiting? Like, does that speed up the chances of finding someone? I guess it's interesting because I have, say, I don't know, 12 IPs who are doing their paperwork at any point in time, and maybe sort of 4 to 8 surrogates who are doing their paperwork. But it's not like then surrogates sit around waiting, because when the surrogate's done all her paperwork and had her mentor session, and then she's ready to be introduced to IPs, then we get on and we do that process, and you know, she looks at profiles. And so there's not this pool of surrogates that are waiting, if that sort of makes sense. So I hope that answers that question. I'm going to go to a great question by Jamie and Cody, who are fantastic members of the community, and they're pregnant as their surrogacy team at the moment. And their question is, how did you navigate post-birth and the 4th trimester as a team? So those who are brand new listening, the 4th trimester is what we call the first 3 months post-birth, because sometimes for a surrogate, well, her body's adjusting to not having the baby to raise. And so that can be tricky as a team sometimes. So as a team, Melissa, any thoughts on navigating that post-birth and those few months post-birth?
So I think we just tried to sort of catch up as much as we could possible, and you know, keep up to date with, you know, just sending photos of Harvey to Rachel and sort of keeping her still involved. I think that's a very important thing. We still do to this day as well. We always send Rachel some photos of Harvey as he's growing and changing. And I think it was quite hard for myself and my husband personally, you know, coming home suddenly with a baby and then having to sort of adjust to parenthood. Quite a shock, obviously, because I didn't experience the pregnancy and any symptoms and give birth. So that was quite a big sort of transition for me personally. I think, like I've said multiple times before, it just felt still so surreal and hard to sort of believe that, you know, it's actually real. He's here. And so I think the first couple of months for myself and my Harry, that was quite a big adjustment, because obviously your whole life changes. You know, you become a mum and a dad, and your whole identity changes. So that was a bit of a shock, actually. So it's just, that was a bit of a process. But, you know, obviously we got there and it's all good. It's fine.
But it can be quite lonely too sometimes as a parent, and adjusting to your life now with this baby nonstop. And yes, so was there any types of supports in particular for yourself then that you found helpful?
I think at the time I found it helpful just reaching out to my mum a lot, you know, just sort of speaking to her on the phone, because obviously at the time we were still living in Adelaide. So first, you know, a couple of weeks when Harvey was born, and we actually moved to New South Wales I think roughly when Harvey was a month old. Yeah, so that was quite full on, but I think it was really good having more support from family close by, especially my auntie. She'd come over once a week and help me just to sort of do bits and pieces and look after Harvey, so I could, you know, have some time to decompress every now and then. But yeah, I think it's definitely important to have that support because it is a big transition, especially when you've lived, you know, knowing that you can't have children easily for so long, and then, you know, it's almost like a shock to your system.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, and with the move back into state at 1 month, you had a lot going on.
Yeah, very stressful. I don't recommend it.
No, perhaps not. No. Two anonymous questions that have been typed in here, so I'll read them out and interested to hear your thoughts. This first person has had a beautiful person offer to be a surrogate for them via Facebook. She's not had any children of her own, and her and her husband don't want any. Is there any way this is going to work for us, or does she have to have had a baby of her own? Perhaps I'll answer that one. My first question back to you, Anonymous, is what state are you in? Well, actually, it doesn't matter where you, the intended parents, are. It matters where she lives. So this fact is that if a surrogate has not had her own children, doesn't matter where the surrogate lives, the intended parents can only live in New South Wales, Queensland, and South Australia. So I'm hoping, Anonymous, you are in one of those states as the intended parents, because that's how the laws work. Yes, but no, it's not the most common thing to happen for a surrogate not to have had her own kids, but it does happen from time to time, and surrogates often just know they can do it. They feel a calling to it. So if she's saying that she probably can, but perhaps some like a pre-surrogacy counselling session might be really good to help her really talk that through. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Melissa?
No. Sorry, no, I think you covered a lot.
Anonymous adds, they're in New South Wales, so yes, it can be done. It is not illegal. You might read somewhere going, oh, it's not recommended. Maybe not, but doesn't make it illegal. So yes, you can do it, Anonymous. I hope coming to this webinar and hearing that fact tonight has been very helpful for you. Another Anonymous asks, for the altruistic pathway, what is in it for the surrogate? Is there any kind of power pitch to win over potential surrogates or friends we know who might be good candidates? That's an interesting question, a power pitch. Any thoughts on that, Melissa? Did you feel that you had to sort of sell yourselves as IPs in some ways at different times?
Yeah, I think definitely when we were part of the South Australian community, we definitely felt like we had to sort of, you know, push ourselves out of our comfort zone quite a lot. My husband and I are naturally quite introverted and reserved, so that's quite a hard thing at times, and it almost felt like it wasn't genuine, and it just didn't feel natural to us, which was quite hard. Obviously, you have to sort of get yourself out there, but at the same time, it's like, oh, you know, this feels a bit unnatural. But I think, yeah, it's obviously, you know, just it's important just to, you know, share who you are as a person and just, you know, just be your true self. And I think that's all that matters. And, you know, it's all about, you know, connection. And I think we were really lucky with Rachel because we were just on the same page with everything. It was just such an easygoing, you know, journey. You know, like Rachel, she's, you know, Rachel's quite introverted herself, so it worked really well. And I think it's just, you just need to find your team. And I think that's when it's going to work the best, is when you have, you connect with a surrogate who is very similar to you and in values and beliefs and whatnot. So I think that matters a lot, definitely. But yeah, it's definitely hard sort of putting yourself out there, especially if it's, you know, not something you would usually do.
Did you have to do a sort of power pitch, as it were, to your own friends and family to see if there was anybody among your own existing networks that might offer?
Yeah, well, we shared our story to our family, and we made it sort of clear that we were wanting to connect, or we were having to connect with a surrogate. Didn't really have much luck there, unfortunately. I did have a few people. I had a cousin actually that said, "Oh, I'll be your surrogate," but I think she didn't understand the full process involved at that time. And then when she sort of read a bit more into it, she was like, "Oh, I don't think it's for me," which is understandable. So I think, yeah, you sort of get your hopes up a bit too when you have family members that will offer or say, "Oh, I'll be your surrogate," with good intentions, of course, but they don't really understand the full, you know, process involved to being a surrogate. And yeah, so it's quite intense and quite full on. So I completely understand with regards to that. But yeah, I think that yeah, it was quite I think that's another reason why Harry and I were a bit worried that we won't connect with a surrogate, because obviously you hear, oh, people connect, you know, obviously having a surrogate that's a close friend to them or a relative. And I only had 4 older brothers, so I mean, there's no chance, you know, of having anyone to help me there. And you know, all my cousins as well, they had kids of their own, or they were sort of, you know, had, you know, difficulties with their pregnancy. So yeah, it's just one of those things, I suppose. So yeah, it's definitely like a waiting game for sure.
It is, right? Yes. And then anonymous, could be a different anonymous, has typed in about costs, a ballpark figure on the cost. Perhaps before you answer that, I'll give my data gathering, and because sometimes talking money can be a bit of a personal thing, from some gathering of data asking other teams that have carried before, the range is about 35 to 90,000 with an average of about 60,000. It cost my dad 60,000 because 30,000 of that was the IVF with no Medicare rebates. Those at the lower end there, that say the 30,000, they probably live in the same state, so they didn't have interstate travel and accommodation. It probably worked first embryo transfer, and so hence they didn't need as much IVF and didn't have to pay loss of wages or much. And up at the 90,000 end, it's often more teams who are interstate, so the travel there took multiple embryo transfers. They might have had loss of wages to cover. Do you feel comfortable telling us a number for yours, Melissa, or in the ballpark?
Yeah, so Harry and I, we calculated it roughly. So I think it cost us all up roughly 70,000. So it was actually a bit more than we expected. But yeah, it was quite tough with the second round of IVF because we weren't entitled to any Medicare rebates, because as soon as you mention the word surrogate, that's it, you're not covered for Medicare whatsoever. So we didn't know that at the time, because our first round, we received Medicare rebates. So you have to be sort of quite careful with how you word it. But then obviously Rachel was also seeing our fertility doctor. She started having appointments with him as well. So he was well aware that we had a surrogate. So we couldn't get out of it, of course. But that was quite a shock when we did the IVF round, because we were thinking we would be covered with, you know, have received the rebates again, but that wasn't the case. So we were a bit unprepared with that. So it sort of put us off guard.
Definitely. And so as a side note, Surrogacy Australia, the organisation, our board of volunteers, that's one of the things that we campaign for, like legal reforms, but also Medicare reform. We've got a Dr. Shardy, who's with IVF Australia, who's on the board, and it's about at grassroots level changing the definition of infertility so that eventually we can get Medicare rebates. So watch this space. I'm sure in the future it will, because it's not going to break the bank for Medicare to let a few hundred people do this, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's definitely frustrating. So it must be like a form of discrimination. How, you know, you don't have a uterus, therefore you're not entitled. I just think that's ridiculous, to be honest.
it is. You've already had such an uphill battle in your life medically, and as well the 2 guys. You know, it's battle after battle. It's just discrimination.
Definitely. It just adds a whole another layer of stress that you just don't need.
Emotional, financial, the lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, as we come to the end, is there anything that you would like to add about your journey that was particularly challenging or you're particularly proud of?
I think another thing I'd have to say is, you know, obviously when your baby's born, and you know, I think it's important to sort of get onto the parentage order as soon as possible and start the application process straight away. So we've had quite a stressful process with actually applying for the parentage order. One of the main reasons was because we had a bit of delay with Harvey's birth certificate. But obviously the process is so different in each state. So we assumed that the process would be the same in New South Wales, the same as South Australia, but it's very different here. So that's one thing I definitely recommend is, you know, as soon as baby's born, within, you know, I think you can start applying within 30 days, but not before 6 months. I would get onto that as soon as possible because it's been so stressful. We only just submitted our application last month, and there's so much involved. And I think yeah, and before we actually started the process, we thought it would be a little bit easier, a bit smooth sailing, but it hasn't been, to be honest. It's been quite up and down, and yeah, quite intense. So that's something I definitely would recommend is, you know, as soon as your baby's born, start looking at applying straight away.
Was that extra complex for you because you had done the initial legal work in South Australia, and so you have to do it through South Australia, but you've moved into state? Is that what made you?
Oh, it was very, very, very confusing. So we initially thought that we could still apply for the parentage order in South Australia, but we later found out that wasn't the case. So I think in South Australia, the process is a bit more straightforward. You don't need to do additional post birth counselling, whereas in New South Wales you have to, which we weren't aware of. So it's a bit more fiddly. But I believe the process in South Australia is longer but shorter in New South Wales. So I guess that's an advantage that we have, I suppose. But it's, yeah, very very up and down. Yeah.
Oh, these are very wanted babies, aren't they? A lot of work.
Definitely.
Wonderful. So have we covered it all? Or I know you had some notes there, but anything else that springs to mind?
It looks like there's a lot. I'm sure I'm probably missing something. I'm sure. Yeah, I think I've covered a fair bit, actually, to be honest. I don't really have anything else to say or to add.
That's great. Well, you've done it. You've become a mum. And, you know, for people listening who are brand new, this could happen to you too. And Melissa and I were talking before that because I've been running these webinars for about 4 years, and she attended one, you know, at the beginning. And so it's
Yeah.
a beautiful circular moment for me to have one of the attendees on as a co-host. So
Yeah, that's right.
So yes, so for anybody listening tonight that's at the beginning of their journey, any advice on that first step that they could take to start this journey for themselves?
Yeah, I think sort of, I mean, obviously, you know, you sort of need to get the message out there. That would be the first step. You know, speak to family members, just let them know that you're looking at, you know, looking into surrogacy. I think that's an important first step, of course. Yeah, I think I know it's really hard to, you know, have doubts and that's not going to happen. But I think one thing that really helped my husband and I was that we always held on to the belief that we would become parents. We always knew that it would happen eventually, even though we had lots of hurdles and lots of ups and downs, you know, in very challenging moments. I think we always knew in our heart that our dreams would come true. And I think that's so important because that at times makes it a little bit easier to deal with when times get tough. I think just holding on to the hope is so important. That's one thing I would think is very important, to be honest, is, you know, like for us, we didn't think it was going to be possible a lot of the time. And then when it did happen, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, dreams do come true. There are amazing people out there that will help you, you know, and it's hard to believe, but it is possible. And these things do happen.
Beautifully said. I don't think there's any more to hold on to that hope, and it can happen. Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your journey with us tonight.
No worries. Thank you.
I'll sum it up for everybody and say thank you for joining us, and we hope you found it useful. The next webinar is in a fortnight's time, and it is a little bit more focused for surrogates, but I would encourage any intended parents to come along and listen to the surrogate webinar as well for the information there and for to hear from the co-host. If you've still got lots of unanswered questions or you would like them answered privately, consider joining SAS so that you can be connected with a mentor and have them answered in that one-on-one setting. I like to say, let's change the world one conversation at a time so we can educate more people about how surrogacy works in Australia. It can be very lonely and overwhelming in the beginning, but there is plenty of support in the village if you go looking for it. And as the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. And in the case of surrogacy, it takes a village to make a child. So welcome to the village, everyone. And I'll just add one extra thing that I saw in chat. Yes, these are turned into a recording. You might have missed that at the beginning. They are on our YouTube channel, Surrogacy Australia, and also a podcast. So Surrogacy Australia Conversations for that. So I'd love for you to subscribe so that you can see this episode in coming weeks. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we'll say good night there. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Bye.